National Shop Stewards Network. And like many other trade unionists, we were supporting Jeremy Corbyn in the general election. That result has now meant that we have a weak and divided Tory government. The issue is, how do we get the Tories out? How do we get Jeremy Corbyn and his result has now meant that we have a weak and divided Tory office. Result has now meant that we have a weak and divided Tory office. And like many other trade unionists, we were supporting Jeremy Corbyn in the general election. That result has now meant that we have a weak and divided Tory government. The issue is, how do we get the Tories out? How do we get Jeremy Corbyn and his programme that supports workers into office? We think there's a couple of things that need to be discussed within the union movement. One, the idea of the TUC and the trade unions calling an emergency national demonstration over the next few weeks on the anti-austerity policies that Jeremy is putting forward, such as scrapping tuition fees, stopping the NHS and schools cuts, repealing the Trade Union Act, £10 minimum wage, all those policies. The other issue is that it's been suggested that the TUC has convened a meeting next week to discuss the 1% pay cap in the public sector. We think that meeting should be discussing planning coordinated strike action throughout the public sector to get rid of that pay cap. So what we are doing right now is putting those things forward for discussion and for the action that's needed now to put pressure on this hated government. And finally, we have our national conference on July the 1st in London. That conference is now needed more than ever. We think it could be a council of war, really, and we invite all trade unionists, all anti-cuts campaigners to come to our event, come and discuss with all the hundreds of trade union shop stewards and union reps and anti-cuts campaigners that will be there about the action that we need now. This Tory government has to go. How do we organise to build the pressure to make sure that we get rid of them, we get the policies that Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell's fought for over the last few weeks to really improve the lives of working people.
Hello and welcome to the final Socialist Party election broadcast. Well, what a week it has been. There is so much to talk about, and that's why we're going to be coming at you with a live broadcast for over an hour. As always, you can send your questions into Facebook and Twitter. The addresses for obviously Socialist Party on Facebook and on Twitter, Socialist_Party. We'll try to get to as many of your questions as we can during the broadcast, but if we don't get to them, we've got a team of eager members ready to answer your questions on Facebook or Twitter in writing. Now, joining me today with the echoes of this tumultuous general election result, I'm joined by Hannah Sell, the Deputy General Secretary of the Socialist Party. Hi. Claire Laker-Mansfield, the Youth and Student Organiser for the Socialist Party. Hello, Claire. And Sarah Rack, the editor of The Socialist.
Hi.
We'll also be joined by guests from Scotland and Northern Ireland via the miracle that is Skype, and hopefully that will all go well. But Hannah, I'll start with you first. The Tories are in crisis. Labour has performed remarkably well on a generally left populist programme. It's a massive turning point in British politics.
Completely, absolutely. I thought it was interesting actually yesterday. Me, like most Socialist Party members, was out campaigning on the streets, and we got two very different responses from the many, many people who came up to us who had voted for Jeremy Corbyn. There were people who were definitely, their heads were down, they were disappointed because they voted for Jeremy Corbyn and they thought they were going to wake up the next morning and have a Jeremy Corbyn-led Labour government. And of course we understand that, we all wanted that, and we understand that disappointment. But I would say, I don't know what you think, a lot more people were coming up grinning, and frankly so were we, grinning. Because you think back, 7 weeks ago, Theresa May called this election and she thought she was going to get a landslide. She was going to have hundreds of Tory MPs extra, and with a huge majority she was going to carry out massive austerity against all of us. And it wasn't just the Tories. It was, unfortunately, a lot of the Labour Party, Labour MPs. Let's remember Peter Mandelson said last September that he was praying for a snap general election because he was so sure that Corbyn would be slaughtered and then they could get rid of him. all the media bile against him, all the rest of it. And in the face of all of that, millions and millions of people saw Jeremy Corbyn's programme, thought we've had 10 years of misery and austerity, while the richest 1,000 people have doubled their wealth, we've had enough, we're going to go and vote for him. And it was fantastic. And, you know, the pictures of all those young people queuing around university campuses to go and vote. But it wasn't just young people. The media kind of story that this was old versus young, we've got to kibosh that. It's not true. It was a huge turnout of young people. But there were also many older people, people perhaps who'd voted for Labour in the past and then said never again in the Blair years, went back and voted Labour because they were also inspired by this programme. And yes, this weekend we've got the horror of May trying to negotiate propping her government in power with the reactionary DUP holding them there. So we don't yet have a Jeremy Corbyn-led government, but it's incredibly weak. The Tories are split down the middle. I mean, in our article that we posted on Friday, we called Theresa May a dead woman walking. You might expect us to say that. This morning, George Osborne said it, because they're so divided. But the only reason that they're going to try and prevent a leadership contest now is because they know that if their splits come into the open, if there's a new general election called, Jeremy Corbyn is likely to win it. I know we don't trust the polls, but Survation were more accurate than anybody else, and they're now saying that Labour are 6 points ahead since the general election. I think that what Jeremy and John have said, that they're going to move their programme in Parliament and demand that MPs back their programme, is completely right. It's totally the right approach. But this can't just be left in the palaces of Westminster. All the people who are disappointed, what I think we have to say to them is we can have a Jeremy Corbyn-led government. We can have the policies that he stood on, but that's not just going to happen in Parliament. We have to mobilise in support of his policies. The trade unions now should call a national demonstration, a massive demonstration, against austerity, for the immediate abolition of tuition fees, to stop the cuts in the NHS, to stop the cuts in the schools, and mobilise a movement in support of what Jeremy is moving in Parliament. On that basis, this government will not last very long at all.
And I think one of the things that would definitely add to that would be these thousands upon thousands of young people who queued outside polling stations, who helped to swing this election in favour of Corbyn. If they were to start to mobilise and to get organised in order to do so, I think that it's clear that if you go to any of those rallies which Jeremy Corbyn held in the last weeks of the campaign, you saw there thousands of people who were not just prepared to go and vote, but who were prepared to come out and who were prepared to chant, to take part in those really energetic and electric kind of rallies that took place, and who were willing to mobilise and to go further than just putting a cross in the box. So I think that in the next few weeks, we know we've got a very weak Tory government. Osborne today saying that Theresa May is a dead woman walking. She might not be walking for very long, especially if we mobilise a mass movement. I think if NUS, the National Union of Students, were to say, we're going to call a national demonstration, put pressure in that way also on the trade union movement to follow that, then that could potentially lead to hundreds of thousands of young people coming out on the streets. That could be the kind of movement that could galvanise young people and obviously would give confidence to all sections of society who are all suffering under austerity and who want to see change.
Yeah, and I think another prospect where we could see big movements is potentially amongst women and LGBT people as well, because there's a lot of people who I think are feeling quite scared maybe about what the DUP indicate, what they represent, and their reactionary attitudes, particularly towards women and LGBT people. But I think it would also be very difficult for the Tories to actually go into any major attack on abortion rights, for example, because there are Tories who try to pitch themselves as socially liberal, progressive on things like that, who call themselves feminists and that kind of things, and would end their careers if they voted with the DUP on that kind of thing. But also it's about the movement that it would provoke, that we are confident that any attempt, for example, to reduce the time limit on abortion would lead to a huge movement of women, young people, working class people to defend women's rights as well. So I think Claire's right, all different sections of society can gain confidence when one group strikes back, and you could see movements on all different fields as well.
Well, just one of the quite pleasing things about watching the coverage was seeing just pollster after pollster, politician, analyst, eating humble pie. But we never dreamed that Corbyn could be this popular. But of course, here in the pages of the Socialist and on our social media, etc., we were quite often saying that Corbyn could do very well and that his ideas were popular. So why did the pollsters and the mainstream media get it so wrong, and why was the Socialist left able to get it so right, Sarah?
Well, I think the thing is about these right-wing politicians and media commentators and stuff is they really believed their own rhetoric. They thought that these ideas weren't popular, that people weren't going to support ideas like a £10 an hour minimum wage and mass council house building and so on. And that is largely because they are completely alienated from what it's like to be a working class person and from the struggles facing ordinary people. Whereas the Socialist Party, from Corbyn's first victory in the first leadership campaign, we've said it is possible that he could win a general election at any time if he puts forward the kinds of policies that won him those leadership campaigns, which is exactly what happened in this election, because the manifesto was full of those kind of things. That's what won the support. And we knew that because we spend our time out on the streets talking to ordinary people, because our members are in the workplaces, in colleges and universities, speaking to people, and knew that there was, in reality, a huge vat of anger under the surface, and people were desperate for any alternative to be put forward. And the problem, I think, facing establishment politicians, the establishment media, and definitely the polling companies, which has really been exposed in this election, is that all of their calculations and positions are based on a political period which is now finished. And we've pointed out time and again that things have changed, things don't work in the old way anymore. And that's been borne out by events in this election as well.
One of the things I think which every single polling company did, apart from I think one which was Survation, which was the only one which got close to the actual result, was that all of them had made a calculation basically based on the idea that young people weren't going to come out to vote, and also that working class people, traditional Labour voters, don't tend to come out to vote. And the reason I think that they made that mistake was because, again, they were looking at it based on the past. They were looking at the idea that young people didn't come out to vote for Ed Miliband. They perhaps saw him as the least bad option in that election. They weren't inspired to go and get out of bed, queue at polling stations, mobilise their friends as they did on Thursday. And I think what's clear is that it's not about the question of whether or not people are bothered to vote. It's about whether they feel like they have something worth voting for. And for the first time in the lifetime of many young people, we saw something which was, we had a real choice in the mainstream, and that was on offer.
Absolutely. I apologise for coughing and spluttering while everyone else has been talking. But it has been lovely to watch the Blairites eat humble pie. And not just the Blairites, all of the media being forced to admit that they didn't expect or understand this. And I do think it's really important we're not naive. We have to recognise these Blairites, the people who are now saying, oh, we were wrong, we want to come back into the shadow cabinet, all of the rest of it, just hours before the election, they were still discussing splitting the Labour Party and forming a new centre party on the basis of Corbyn having done badly. And it was only the fact that he's done well that has forced them to superficially change their mind. I mean, not all of them. Some of them, incredibly, are still trying to say, if it hadn't been Corbyn, Labour would have done even better. I mean, it's ridiculous. People have had enough of austerity. They are not going to vote for New Labour, slightly less nasty austerity than the Tories. They want something different. That's why they voted for Corbyn. But what they're going to do now, a few are going to openly attack him, but most of them are playing nice. They've got no choice. but they'll surround him if they can get away with it, and they're going to try to push him to the right. You've got to be more reasonable. Free education, one of them said this morning in The Observer, free education's all right, but that's not a programme for education. We have to come up with something better. As if free education is not a fantastic policy to put forward that mobilise millions of people. They will try and push it back, especially on Brexit. This idea of cross-party Brexit, the left of the Tories, if you can call them left, the likes of Ruth Davidson are calling for that. So are people like Yvette Cooper. And it's going to be the idea, let's all work together for a reasonable Brexit. I was very pleased that Jeremy said on the Andrew Marr show this morning, no way, we do not want the same Brexit. We are fighting for a jobs Brexit, a Brexit for working class people. We have nothing in common with what the Tory party are arguing for. But that's what they're going to do. They're going to try and surround him and push him right. And we've got to put forward a programme to deal with that. It's brilliant all these people have voted Labour. It's apparently another 160,000 or something have joined the Labour Party since the general election. I don't know what that means the Labour Party membership is now. 700,000? 800,000?
Yeah.
That's it, yeah. That's fantastic. But the Labour Party still, in its machine, got a strong influence from the right wing, the pro-capitalist elements. And it's not enough just to make them be a bit quieter. We've got to make sure that the party is under the control of the ordinary working class people and young people that support Jeremy Corbyn and his programme. So that does raise democratising the Labour Party, organising it so that socialists like ourselves can be part of it as well. We were expelled as part of the move by Blair to transform the party into a capitalist party. Organisations like ours should be part of a federation that makes up the Labour Party. But also the question of mandatory reselection. We could face another general election at any moment, and we don't want to go into another one with Blairite MPs who this time blatantly refused to have Corbyn on their leaflets, blatantly told people whose doors they were knocking on they didn't support Corbyn. Imagine how many extra votes we might have got if they hadn't been sabotaging the campaign in that way. So those questions of transforming the Labour Party are really important post-election. I think the councils as well, that's the other question, because, you know, one of the reasons that some older workers still didn't vote for the Labour Party is because they were sceptical that Jeremy meant what he said. And that isn't because of Jeremy, that's because of their experience of New Labour in office, nationally, but now locally in local councils, where local councils have continued to carry out Tory austerity. Now they've said we've got no choice, the Tory government are making us, and we've never accepted that argument. But now, how could this Tory government make anybody do anything, even if it manages to come into existence? Labour council should just say no, we are not going to carry out a single another cut, and Jeremy should fight for that position. And that would also convince many of the people who are still sceptical, Labour mean this, they're fighting in our interest.
But I suppose a lot of this revolves around the question of, well, what will the Blairites do now in the party? In fact, we've had a question in here from Nicola Day, who's asked precisely that. You know, will the Blairites now make peace with Jeremy Corbyn after this election result? Is that possible? What do people think?
No. No, I mean, as Hannah said, that those divisions haven't gone anywhere. The Blairites and Corbyn and all of Corbyn's supporters stand for fundamentally different things, and that's what the Socialist Party, again, we've raised from when Jeremy first stood in the leadership campaign, that this is two fundamentally opposed wings of the Labour Party. So the majority of the PLP, the majority of Labour councillors, the majority of people in the structures of the Labour Party versus a very small number around Jeremy Corbyn and the masses of people who flooded to support him, the majority of the 800,000 really, and many beyond the membership of the Labour Party. And so that hasn't gone anywhere. But I think, like Hannah said, they're in a bit of a fix now, aren't they? Because they can't come out and openly attack him when he's clearly done so well, even when they try and come up with whatever excuse they can that it wasn't about him. It's clear to the vast majority of people that it was about Jeremy Corbyn and the programme that he put forward that won so much support.
I think that it's kind of ironic that in a lot of areas, Socialist Party members will have given out a lot more leaflets with Jeremy Corbyn's name on than the Labour Party when they went out canvassing, because unfortunately, and of course this was completely a mistake by those candidates, but they put out leaflets which tried to hide the fact that Jeremy Corbyn was the leader of the Labour Party, which were all about their own personal records, which of course in most cases are very unimpressive to begin with. So it's actually been socialists like us who've been raising support for Corbyn, support for Corbyn's policy, support for what's in Labour's manifesto, and actually Labour candidates who wear the Labour rosette, but who are deeply hostile to Jeremy Corbyn, and also not just to him as an individual, but to all those people who have joined up to the party, the working class people, the young people, all of those people who are hopeful about what an anti-austerity party might bring. Those people are also held in contempt by those kinds of politicians, and that's why they're really, really nervous about those kinds of people who've joined having a proper democratic say in the party, because they know that it won't actually go in their favour, and that we'd like to get candidates in who represent the views of the majority in society, working class people who want something different and who backed Corbyn.
Well, we've had another question just come in live from Paul Heron in London, and he's just asking, how can Socialist Party help the battle, if you like, that's going on within the Labour Party? Any volunteers for that one?
Well, I think that...
Go on, Claire.
Well, I think one of the things, we have been helping, I think we've got to say, first of all, over the whole of the last period, we've been mobilising in support of Corbyn. We've been out on street stalls collecting signatures in support of the policies which Corbyn's put in the manifesto: 0-hour contracts, £10 an hour, free education. These are things that we've been campaigning on, not just over the last year, but for many years. I think the other thing that we've been doing, which perhaps some who are also on the left, who perhaps are supportive of Corbyn, have been failing to do, is to actually be honest about what's necessary. Because I think that it's not good enough, really, to tell people that everything's going to be fine, we're all going to be friends, the Blairites are going to be nice. We have to tell people the truth, and we know that from experience, from history, the people who represent the interests of the ruling class, the 1%, don't give up without a fight, and they are, really reeling from the idea that they might now be left with a Labour Party which represents not the interests of big business, not the interests of the capitalist class as it did under Blair and Brown, but which is a more reliable vehicle for working class people to have their voices heard and for their struggles to be reflected. And they are going to fight tooth and nail not to let this party, which they have claimed through the New Labour project, through Blairism, that kind of thing, be taken over, if you like, by working class people, or reclaimed by working class people. So we have to be clear that it's necessary for us to organise to stop that, raising things like reselection, raising what's needed in the councils. We're some of the only people who've been raising what Hannah just said about an anti-austerity programme being implemented in practice in local governments, and helping to organise people both inside and outside the Labour Party, because of course we know that whether you're able to be a member of the Labour Party is not based on your records as a fighter, as a campaigner, whether you're a trade unionist, whether you're a working class person. It's based on whether or not Labour's right-wing compliance unit, which is controlled by the Blairites, is prepared to have you. And that's why they've expelled hundreds of people, Socialist Party members, but also all kinds of ordinary people for posting that they don't like, their local Labour councillor cutting their jobs or services and that kind of thing. All kinds of things like that. So we're saying that those people have to be, the people who are doing that need to be chucked out, and that we need, a genuine party for the 99%.
Absolutely. We've said all along that Labour is two parties in one since Jeremy Corbyn took the leadership, because there's been this huge anti-austerity movement that have joined the Labour Party in support of Jeremy Corbyn, and they're the beginning of a new party. But you've also had the old Blairite pro-capitalist elements who are desperately trying to keep hold of the Labour Party machine. And obviously this general election result is a huge blow to them and has strengthened the Jeremy Corbyn wing of the party. And that's great, but you've got to follow through and finish the job. And there's a temptation at this point in time to say, oh, the Blairites will be nice now, we don't have to worry, but that would be a real mistake. We're the ones all along who fought for the democratisation of the Labour Party. The question of reselection was passed, that MPs should be subject to democratic reselection, was passed by the Unite Conference, the biggest affiliate to the Labour Party, but that was moved by Socialist Party members. We've been arguing for it by trade union conferences up and down the country. But unfortunately, up until now, the leadership of Momentum, the organisation set up to support Jeremy Corbyn, has taken the approach of we've got to work together with the Blairites. We've got, it's like Cameron's hug a hoodie. Hug a Blairite, be nice to them, And eventually they'll give up, compromise with them and cling on until 2020. That was a mistake in the run-up to this election. Now we've got a chance to do things differently, and the things that we've been arguing for, that we've already mentioned, democratise the party, restore the trade union rights in the party, build on the socialist programme, no retreats to from the programme that was put forward in this election, and allow socialists and organisations like ourselves to take part in it, mandatory reselection. All of those things must be fought for now. Those 800,000 members can make them a reality.
Well, one of the most interesting chapters in this general election has been what's happened in Scotland, which once again, for the I think third time in 3 years, has completely upset all the political calculations in this country. I'm hoping to be joined by Phil Scott from Scotland, who's a member of our sister party in Scotland, the Socialist Party of Scotland. Phil, can you hear me there? Is he coming through there? I wonder?
Can you hear me?
This is one of the issues with Skype, that sometimes it can be a bit hit and miss. But we're crossing our fingers here in the studio. If we can't get to Phil, we'll go back. We'll discuss Scotland here in the studio. But I'll just try Phil. Hello, Phil. Can you hear me?
Hi, Neil. Can you hear me?
Oh, fantastic! Great to hear you. How's it going?
Great.
Good man. Good man. Well, Phil. We were just saying that once again, Scotland has completely upset the political calculations in Britain, and we've had a few, I suppose, sourpusses who are now blaming Scotland for keeping Theresa May in power. Can you give us a bit of an explanation about why the results went the way they did in Scotland?
Well, the second biggest losers in this election, apart from Theresa May and the Tory party, was the SNP in Scotland. Because what we saw was the loss of 500,000 votes from the SNP. We've seen 21 seats gone from Nicola Sturgeon's party. And of course we saw Tory seats increasing quite significantly in terms of going from 1 to 13. Now people will ask, why did that happen? And I think that the key reason for that is the polarisation around for or against independence. That what we had was, we had a very significant increase in the Tory vote to about 29%, but they ran on one policy, and it really was a one-club golfer, which was, we're against independence and second in the independence referendum. And on that basis, they won seats that they traditionally would have held up until 1997, which would have been seats like in the northeast of Scotland, in the borders, the rural, more conservative areas that voted heavily against independence in 2014. And that's where the votes came from. But the SNP also lost votes to Labour in Scotland, and there was a certain recovery of the Labour Party, who went from 1 seat to 7. But it could have been much more for Labour. I mean, the Labour left in Scotland today correctly are saying they could have defeated the Tories in terms of number of seats in Scotland if Scottish Labour had fought on Jeremy's programme. But the problem was the Scottish Labour leadership under Kezia Dugdale, Ian Murray and so on are very much opposed to Corbyn and tried to run a campaign like the Tories against a second independence referendum, and that limited the gains, the modest gains that Labour made. So I think those were some of the key features.
Well, we've had a question in from Martin in London just on the issue of the referendum, and I suppose what he's asking is basically if Labour had offered a second referendum, would they have done better, do you think, with the voters?
Yes, I think there's no doubt that the position of the Labour Party on Scottish independence has been the main driving force for its obliteration in 2015. You have to remember they sided with the Tories against Scottish independence as part of the Better Together Project Fear campaign in the independence referendum in 2014. And that led to the complete wipeout of Labour 2 years ago, where they fell from 41 seats to just a single MP. And unfortunately, I think Jeremy made a concession to the right wing in the manifesto, in Labour's manifesto, which was a very good manifesto in general. But in Scotland, it still said, we oppose independence in principle, we oppose any possibility of a second referendum, And that undoubtedly was a barrier for very significant numbers of people who would have voted Labour, who were inspired by Jeremy's anti-austerity programme, and in fact just 700 votes of a difference would have led to Labour not winning 7 seats but 15 seats, because the SNP clung on in seats in Glasgow by sometimes 60 votes, 70 votes and 80 votes, and it was a very, very narrow scrape, if you like. The SNP could have lost much more. But the main gainers, I think, was Jeremy's anti-austerity manifesto, and I think those are the lessons that the Labour Party and the Labour left have to learn in Scotland, is to now challenge for the leadership of the Scottish Labour Party and to remove the right wing in Kezia Dugdale.
Well, just on that, one of the things I think that gets lost sometimes about Scotland, with all the talk of referendum, is that there's a lot else going on in Scotland, particularly, quite a struggle against austerity. And I know Socialist Party Scotland members, particularly in Glasgow through the Unison branch, have been waging quite an effective struggle against council cuts, etc. So I'm just wondering, really, will this result, will it have an effect now on the the calculations of trying to implement austerity in Scotland in terms of first of all the left and Labour, but even the SNP? Will it be more difficult for them now to implement Tory austerity?
I mean, the balance of forces is very much shifted. I think that we have a decisively weakened Tory government, an alliance potentially with the DUP, or whether that ever comes to fruition is not clear yet. I think in Scotland you've got a weakened SNP who have been a delivery mechanism for Tory cuts for the last 3 or 4 years in particular. And I think that the potential, if the trade unions and the working class and young people come out in an organised campaign, is that we can shift the balance of power to the left, and we can begin to inflict significant defeats on the austerity agenda. Just yesterday, for example, the Scottish Teachers Union, the EIS, have voted unanimously in favour of a campaign leading to industrial action and strike action over pay. There's the potential, I think, for a whole range of struggles to break out at a local and indeed at a national level, and certainly Socialist Party Scotland members who do play an important role in the trade unions in Scotland will certainly be pushing for mass demonstrations, for coordinated industrial action, and for a campaign to defeat the austerity agenda from wherever it comes from. But there is there's an increased confidence among working people in Scotland. From the stalls yesterday, we detected a much more enthusiastic mood, a mood that wasn't even there during the election, I have to say. But I think that effectively the defeat of May, which is what has happened, the enormous support for Corbyn's programme, has begun to give people confidence that it's possible to inflict more defeats on the right and on the capitalist establishment.
Okay, we've just had one question coming in live from us. If you can try and be as brief on it, but I think it's an important question, which is what is actually the attitude of the Socialist Party in Scotland to the issue of Scottish independence? Not the easiest one.
Yeah, well, briefly, absolutely. We campaigned in favour of a yes vote in the 2014 referendum, but we campaigned for an independent socialist Scotland. We did not accept the SNP's white paper, the prognosis that a capitalist Scotland would solve any of the problems that face working class people. That what we put forward is a policy in favour of socialist change, while defending the right of the Scottish people to determine their own future. And just in terms of the position that Jeremy and the Labour left have taken on independence, there is no reason why, as a socialist, as somebody on the left, you cannot defend the unity of the working class across Scotland, England, Wales, and indeed Ireland, and at the same time defend the right of the Scottish people to self-determination. So while it is true that we would give critical support to a yes vote, and indeed in any future Scottish referendum we would support a yes vote for independence, we also stand for the unity of the working class across the whole of Britain in the context of a socialist confederation of Scotland, England, Wales and Ireland. And I think that type of approach can answer the desires of working people to be united against the capitalist establishment and at the same time defend the rights of the Scottish people to self-determination.
Okay, thanks very much, Phil, for that really comprehensive rundown of what's happening in Scotland. Hopefully we'll have Phil on again in future broadcasts. But now I'd like to turn a bit to the particular issue of young people who really had a real, I suppose, transformative effect on the election. And we have a bit of footage, actually, which shows maybe the bit of the tremors that were going on. This is footage taken from about a week before the general election. It's from a school prom. Which I think we're going to roll it there. Here it comes.
Honestly, I'm not quite. Honestly, I'm not quite sure how I won. The secret is a dedicated pool of voters. Just like Labour in this general election. Come on everyone, vote Labour. Jeremy Corbyn. If you don't vote Jeremy Corbyn, I don't know what you're doing. Jeremy Corbyn! Oh, 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 Jeremy Corbyn!
Well, if that footage doesn't warm your heart, I think you need a heart transplant. And you know, if they say he who has the youth has the future, then I think we can see who has captured the imagination of young people from that footage. I think we have some other footage as well, just from yesterday of some of young people's reaction to the results. This is from I think from Trafalgar Square in London with some of the celebrations, if you like. We're going to roll that bit. Here we go.
Started! 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 Started!
Started! So Claire, I mean, young people's vote in the election did have a transformative effect, but I think the effects of young people getting politically active will be felt far beyond the ballot box.
Well, absolutely. And just to give some of the figures, which I'm sure people have perhaps seen in the papers, more than 70% of young people are estimated to have turned out to vote at this election. And if you compare that with what happened in 2015, when only 42% turned out, that's a huge increase in terms of people wanting to come out and vote. And 2/3 of young people voted for Corbyn and for the Labour Party, and that is an indication of the mood. And of course, it's been expressed in the ballot box, but as we've seen in those clips, it's gone well beyond that. It's a whole new generation starting to rediscover socialist ideas, left ideas, inspired by what's been put forward. And of course, there's huge potential for that to develop. And it's not just something we're seeing in Britain, of course, it's also an international phenomenon. We've had Bernie Sanders over during the course of the campaign. Young people everywhere are starting to look at socialist ideas with fresh eyes. And of course, you've got to consider that for our generation, many of us have grown up in a period in which when socialism was discussed and when socialist ideas were discussed, it was often as if they were confined to the history books, that these things were from the past. Of course, what we've seen, and you can see really clearly expressed in those clips, is that the truth that we've always said and what we know, which is that socialist ideas are not just from the past, they belong to the future, and they belong to the next generation of young people, and they are being grasped now with two hands by all of those people. So I think that absolutely we need to try and mobilise and galvanise that energy. We need to make sure that that energy that's developed over the course of this campaign doesn't dissipate now, that it's harnessed, that we get those young people out on protest, that we demand free education, that we demand £10 an hour, an end to zero-hour contracts, and that we demand the back of this Tory government. They've got no legitimacy to continue to implement austerity, these policies. We need to see the back of them, and that chant, Tories out, yesterday was what people really wanted to take up, because they knew that Theresa May has lost any credibility which she ever had to govern in Britain, and that she and her government and the Tories need to be out of the door. And one of the things I think that we need to think about is how do we get young people organised? Because there's clearly a massive mood for change, a massive mood to change things. But at the moment, there isn't an organisation which is able to properly mobilise those people. Of course, we have got, in the Labour Party, many of them I expect will potentially have joined the Labour Party over the last few weeks. Labour students, Labour youth, Young Labour, which are both, unfortunately, in the hands of the right wing at the moment, so aren't really mobilising those young people, aren't really doing anything which can help them to organise. What we're saying, therefore, is that we need to start to look at how we can take those kinds of initiatives ourselves. Socialist Party members are involved in lots of different campaigns. One of them is Youth Fight for Jobs, which has been campaigning for some of those policies for a whole period of time. We're also part of Socialist Students, which is an organisation on over 40 campuses in the country, and members of those organisations are discussing now, can we launch a new initiative which is designed to organise young people who are looking towards socialist ideas, to be active, to be out on the streets, but also to discuss those ideas, to discuss what's necessary to change the world, to discuss what's needed in this fight within Labour, the civil war, what kind of ideas we need in order to win those things. So on Saturday, when we were out yesterday doing that kind of campaigning, there were around 1,000 young people out on the streets just a day after the election, still often in many cases with the tired eyes of the sleepless election night or hangovers from the parties that went on Friday. We were starting to talk about whether people would want to be involved in some kind of initiative. We were signing people up, and I think that there will be a lot of take-up for something like that for a young socialist or a generation socialist. We can decide all of the names and that kind of thing, but that's something that we're looking to launch, and we think could really get an echo.
I think that kind of initiative can play a really important role as well in uniting people across generations, because the establishment is trying to turn this into a young versus old, clash. When actually we, during the election campaign, Socialist Party members kept reporting meeting older people who were voting for Corbyn because they supported his programme for young people, because it's something that everyone cares about, young people having a decent future, having a job to look forward to, decent wages, and all of those kinds of things. And so, this kind of initiative, it can increase that kind of support, I think, but also can help link young people to the struggles of maybe older workers in the trade unions and that kind of thing as well. So that's, something that we'll definitely be trying to bring into it.
Okay, well, hopefully this can be the beginning of a new youth movement in Britain. But turning to another aspect of this election, which is that there was a lot of talk about a coalition of chaos by Theresa May in the run-up to the election. But of course now we're in a position where the Tory party are being forced to rely on the Democratic Unionist Party in Northern Ireland. Now, I'm Irish myself, so I'm quite familiar with the DUP. But for many people in Britain, the very existence of the DUP and their policies have become something of a rude awakening about what an aspect of politics is like in Northern Ireland. But to maybe explain this a bit more, I'm very pleased to be joined by Kevin Henry from our sister organisation in Ireland, in Belfast. Hello, Kevin, can you hear me?
Oh, yeah.
Fantastic, very good. Okay, Kevin, well, as a fellow Irishman with the full appreciation that asking a historical question about Ireland can be very, very long, can you briefly explain to people at home who the DUP are?
Yeah, well, the DUP are the largest party in Northern Ireland, and like all the main parties in Northern Ireland, they base themselves on playing on sectarianism, and they maintain their base and build their base on that basis. Their party founder and the leader for several generations or decades was Ian Paisley, who, in the course of the Troubles, played a role of whipping up sectarianism. And they emerged as the largest political party in 2003. They previously opposed the Good Friday Agreement and gained some support on that basis. But people at that time were looking to the party that they felt that could best defend their community over the other community, and that resulted in the DUP emerging as the largest political party in the Unionist or the Protestant community, and Sinn Féin emerging in the Catholic community. And shortly after that, several years, Sinn Féin and the DUP done what was considered unthinkable, and they formed a coalition, which maybe some people in Northern Ireland would view as a coalition of chaos. We were told at the time that it would be something new. There was pictures all over the press of Martin McGuinness and Ian Paisley laughing together. They were called the Chuckle Brothers. But what that coalition has achieved is a maintenance of sectarianism. Both parties at different points have walked out. They've been riddled with crisis. It's been a coalition that's implemented austerity, a bit like how the Labour Party at local level in Britain and the SNP implement austerity at the behest of the Tories. And there's been a coalition that has been mired in corruption. Most recently, the RHI scandal, where I could spend a long time explaining, but hundreds of millions of pounds was wasted in a renewable heating scheme. Obviously, what people in Britain probably have most shocked by is the reactionary social agenda of the DUP, and that is very real when it comes to gay rights. Sinn Féin, or the DUP, sorry, in the 70s, were parts and formed a group called Ulster Against Sodomy, which campaigned against the decriminalisation of homosexuality. Its members have made lots of homophobic comments, which of course have a real effect on young LGBT people. And most recently, they have acted to block marriage equality in Northern Ireland from being introduced. But I think one thing as a socialist in Northern Ireland, I'd say, is not just the DUP that have that reactionary agenda. People in Britain for the last 50 years have, women in Britain for the last 50 years have had the right to abortion rights. In Northern Ireland, that is blocked by all the main political parties, not just the DUP. And I think one thing people who might look at it might think is that people in Northern Ireland have quite backward ideas, whereas the reality is that the overwhelming majority of people support marriage equality, they support abortion rights. Even among DUP voters, there's a majority support for both of those issues.
Sorry, Kevin, can I just ask you there, because our social media is lighting up with questions, and one of the big questions they're asking is that if these sectarian parties don't represent a lot of the political ideas of people in Northern Ireland, could there be some sort of alternative? Particularly, should the Labour Party run in Northern Ireland? On sort of Jeremy Corbyn's anti-austerity programme, and would that be popular in Northern Ireland? Do you think?
I think that'd be very popular in Northern Ireland. There's a desperate need for a party that can bring together Catholic and Protestant, working class and young people. A party that will stand up for the LGBT community, for women, for workers, and actually try and deal with the issues of sectarian division that are very real in society. And if you look at the membership of the Labour Party in Northern Ireland was tiny. It was 100 members, completely irrelevant. It's now 3,000 members. In terms of party membership, it's the second largest party in Northern Ireland, but it's not allowed to stand in elections. And we support the right of Labour Party members to stand in elections. And we'll go further than that, and we'll say that the Labour Party here, if the Labour Party in Britain refuses to let them stand, be that the right wing or the left wing of the Labour Party, that they should unilaterally decide to stand and put the resources into building a Labour alternative, which has a strong tradition in Northern Ireland going back to the 70s.
Okay, well, it sounds like quite exciting times. Unfortunately, we're running out of time. There's loads more we'd like to ask you, Kevin. But if people want to, get a bit more in depth about what's happening in Northern Ireland, they can go to the website of Socialist Party in Northern Ireland, which is. Can you give us the website there, Kevin?
Socialistpartyni.net.
Yeah, and there's a new article that's gone up which deals with a lot of the issues that Kevin has gone in. So thanks, Kevin. All the best.
Thank you.
So, just talking a bit more about, I suppose, what happens after the election. I mean, for us in the Socialist Party, political activity doesn't just end after the election is over. I mean, yesterday we were out sort of sampling the mood, if you like, in all towns and cities across Britain. I think we've got a few pictures to show you coming up there. And we had a great response, actually. In Manchester, some kind soul came up and gave our stall cake, which is very much appreciated. So if you are watching at home and thinking about bringing cake to future Socialist Party stalls, then please do. We also had in another town, we had a taxi driver, just stopped his car, got out and took some leaflets off it. Good political consciousness, perhaps not so much on the driving part of it. But then also, I think what was particularly pleasing was in London, we met a number of people who've been watching the broadcast and have become interested in the ideas of the Socialist Party as well, thanks to it. So we're very grateful for that. That the people are watching are enjoying the broadcast. But Hannah, you said earlier 180,000 people have joined the Labour Party. So I mean, clearly that shows that people want to get politically organised and politically active. The Socialist Party has written before that members of the Labour Party would be very welcome in the Socialist Party. But why would they want to join the Socialist Party?
Well, I think everybody listening to this broadcast and perhaps watching it afterwards as well should consider joining the Socialist Party. It's a huge step forward what's taking place. There's no question about that. As Claire was saying earlier, this is a generation of people who, if they've heard about socialism at all, have heard of it as something historical, finished, not relevant today, and their lived experience has been being told the majority of people have to tighten their belts, you've got to be worse off, there's no option because capitalism is a system in crisis. They don't explain that's why, but that's the reality of it. And that's what people have experienced. And now, suddenly, there is a generation who have got hope, as Jeremy Corbyn has put it, because they've seen something else is possible. That you could have a £10 an hour minimum wage, you could have free education, you could have a house to live in that you can actually afford, that those things are possible. And linked to that, people have seen that the idea of socialism is linked to all of those things, a society that is run for the millions and not the billionaires. The other thing I think is really important is the fact so many people are joining the Labour Party, because there was a period where people were really angry at all of the establishment parties, including New Labour, but they didn't have the idea that they could organise a different party that actually stood up for the majority. And the people joining to support Jeremy Corbyn, that's the start of that. But it's not enough. People need to join the Socialist Party as well. When we were in the Labour Party, as the militant tendency, and I know we're not plugging it particularly this week, but there is a very good book that's just come out, written by our General Secretary, which explains the history of how we were expelled from the Labour Party. But we were expelled because we were an extremely serious force, the backbone of the left in reality. We led mass movements that defeated Thatcher, defeated the poll tax. We led Liverpool City Council, which took on and defeated the Tories. And the Blairites understood to make Labour safe for capitalism, they had to expel us. Why? Because we support every step forward, but we're not just cheerleaders. We think what's happening with Jeremy Corbyn is brilliant, great. And we're mobilising everything we can in support of it. But it's not our job to just go, oh, rah, rah, it's great, it's wonderful. It's our job to put forward what needs to be done to successfully consolidate the victories. So right now, we're not just saying it's great that Jeremy Corbyn got such a good vote. We're also saying we, the workers' movement, have to mobilise on the streets. Young people have to mobilise on the streets in support of Jeremy Corbyn's programme. And we're fighting for that. So at every stage we put forward concrete steps forward. Also for the democratisation of the Labour Party and for the Blairites to be dealt with. We at the same time argue for socialism, for a different kind of society. And that is really important. It's important now, but it's going to be even more important in the future. Because all of the bile against Jeremy Corbyn, all of the attacks on him, they are nothing compared with what the capitalist class, the 1%, would do against a Jeremy Corbyn-led Labour government. Because they are desperate to protect their profits. They're terrified of Jeremy Corbyn, not primarily actually because of his good but quite modest programme. What they're terrified about is that the appetite grows with the eating. And people will want more. Imagine if the steelworks are threatened with closure again, while we've got a Jeremy Corbyn-led Labour government. I'd have no doubt the steel workers would occupy those steel plants and call for Jeremy to nationalise them. Why wouldn't you? So people will demand more socialist measures, and the capitalists are terrified of that. This is an aside, but this morning I watched Michael Heseltine on the Andrew Marr show. I thought it was very interesting because he is a dyed-in-the-wool pro-EU Tory, but it wasn't Brexit that he cared about. He was arguing for Theresa May to stay in place because of the fear of a Jeremy Corbyn-led Labour government. That's what they all care about, more than anything else. Jeremy gets elected, the capitalist class will try and sabotage his government. The markets will plunge, all the rest of it. How do you respond to that? By more thoroughgoing socialist measures. Doesn't mean we can't get our programme implemented. Absolutely we can. But we can't give in to the blackmail of the capitalist class. They try and carry out a capital strike, which is what they do, against a democratically elected Labour government. Our response is, we will nationalise your companies under democratic control. Who is it that makes the trains run? Is it Southern Rail or is it railway workers? Who keeps the steel industry run? It's the steel workers. We can run society. We could take over not every small business, but the 100 or so that dominate the British economy, and then to begin to build a socialist society that really is for the many and not the few. And that's the programme that we put forward and fight for and will be necessary in the period we're going into, where a new generation are discovering socialist ideas, and that's fantastic, and are mobilising in support of those ideas, and that's fantastic. But the task that will be posed is to defeat the attempts of sabotage of the capitalist class and carry through a socialist transformation of society. And I would say, if you agree with what we're saying today, then yes, join the Labour Party. Yes, get active in support of Jeremy Corbyn, but also join us in the Socialist Party and the Committee for Workers International and fight for a new society.
Okay, well, thanks for that, Hannah. As always, we've had so many questions, but I'm afraid our hour is coming to an end, so we're going to have to bring things to a close. We were noticing that our social media was lighting up with likes and hearts while Hannah was making her speech. So if you're not yet a member of the Socialist Party, turn that like into a join. The Socialist Party will be more than welcome, and there's details of how to join on our website, on social media as well. As well as joining, we'd also like you to read our paper and subscribe to our paper as well. What do you think, Sarah?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, all of the ideas that we've discussed here today are in the pages of the Socialist. The reports from the campaigning that you've seen a glimpse of is in the pages of the Socialist. We want people to write in and tell us what they think about this broadcast or anything else that they want to share. And yeah, so definitely subscribe to the Socialist, read our website, socialistparty.org.uk, and you can also subscribe on that to keep discussing these ideas as we go forward.
Well, this is the final election broadcast, but we know there's over 1,000 of you who've been watching this live, so don't fear that this is the end of Socialist TV. We'll be coming at you with more broadcasts. I'm sure there's going to be plenty of news and content that the Tories, the DUP, the Labour Party, everyone else, and hopefully the mass movement of the working class and youth are going to generate for us to talk about, for you to watch. So keep an eye on our Facebook, Twitter, on our website as well for further broadcasts. I'm going to leave you now with a video from our General Secretary, Peter Taft, to round up the discussion, which is going to be looking back a bit on the implications of this vote and this general election. So we're just going to roll that there now with Peter, hopefully. Let's see, Peter, here we go.
General election and its outcome represented a big defeat for Theresa May and for the rich and powerful that stands behind her and their government. We faced an unprecedented barrage from a hostile press against Labour and particularly against the figure of Jeremy Corbyn. The journalists of the Daily Mail, of the Telegraph, of the Express, and not least the Sun, dipped their pens in mad dog saliva to malign and attack Jeremy Corbyn over the whole of the election campaign. Actually, before the election campaign and in the election campaign itself. He was pictured as a friend of the terrorists, which was stepped up after the two terrible bombings that took place in Manchester and in London. But it did not cut any ice with the overwhelming majority of people, because the programme that he was putting forward was resonating with their experiences in austerity Britain, in capitalist austerity Britain, and the solutions that he was proposing was also finding an echo. The argument was by Theresa May at the beginning of the campaign, when, let's remember, she had about more than a 20% lead in the opinion polls, and it was a mere formality, the election campaign. It would represent a triumphal march of Theresa May and the Tories back to power, for her to do a dirty work in attacking the living standards of the working class. It was not to be, because the election campaign transformed the situation. And I have to say, it was transformed in a way that the Socialist Party welcomed, because we advocated many of the policies that were taken up by Jeremy Corbyn and which were enshrined in the manifesto of the Labour Party for the election itself. Theresa May said that it's a choice between her and chaos. Just look at the chaos that has resulted and the disarray in the ranks of the Tory party in the aftermath of the election campaign. She's even threatened a vicious attack on human democratic rights under the bogus title of fighting terrorism. The only way to fight terrorism, of course, is to resist them in an organised form, but also to create the conditions where working people can live a decent life, and above all to stop the foreign wars of conquests that have led to this horrible situation that we found in these terrorist incidents themselves. Why has the outcome of the election been a triumph for Jeremy Corbyn, although it has not resulted in a majority where Corbyn can automatically form a government? But it's a dramatic increase against the expectations that were put forward by the enemies of Corbyn and by the enemies of the Labour movement. And the explanation is very simple. The life experiences of ordinary working people, while May and Cameron before her were in power, is an undermining of their living standards, of the deterioration in all fields of the living standards of working people, of the mistreatment of the youth. And what a marvellous example young people gave in the election yesterday, when they flocked in their thousands to register their vote. Many of them even stayed on at university, and that's an indication of how they saw this election, and particularly the appeal of Corbyn to abolish tuition fees, how that resonated with young working people and working people in general. There is inequality of Grand Canyon proportions. The programme of Jeremy Corbyn of taxing the rich, which we would support. However, we say the only way to carry that through properly is to take over the sources of the power and the income of the rich, which is in the giant firms, the monopolies, that control 70 to 80% of the economy, and introduce a socialist plan of production. A good start was made in the election, when the manifesto, in a real term in elections in Britain, particularly by Labour, when in the course of the election campaign, the manifesto outlined at least the nationalisation of water and of energy and so on. For instance, the nationalisation of the railways. We have a nationalised rail firms in Britain. It just happened to be German firms that are nationalised, that are exploiting the position that they have in Britain itself. Capitalism cannot deliver the goods for working people. That is shown by the terrible position that exists in wages, of the longest period of stagnation in wages against the background of a rise in prices, which is the longest stagnation in something like 200 years. We believe you should nationalise not every little corner shop, but the big monopolies that control 70 to 80% of the economy. We would be prepared to give compensation on the basis of proven need. Take the railway industry itself. In Britain, on average, 17% of income is paid for in fares on the railway. In Germany, that comes down to 7%. And therefore, that shows the disparity and the problems that we have faced. Now, in the aftermath of the election, Theresa May has attempted to cling to power. She's done a dirty deal with the Democratic Unionist Party in Northern Ireland. This would be an amalgam. It would be a coalition, a real coalition of chaos that will produce upheavals in the British Parliament and in general in society, because they will not be able to develop and to put forward a programme that will satisfy the interest of the majority of the people itself. She gambled that she would get a landslide, and she has lost. Theresa May has no legitimacy. The very fact that the Tories did not get a majority and are forced to go into an unholy alliance is an indication of this. They should make way for Labour to have a chance to form a minority government. And as John MacDonald said, the Labour will put down a motion in the House of Commons. The first item will be abolition of tuition fees and all the other demands put forward by Labour, and invite other parties to either support that programme or to be condemned in the eyes of their own supporters and their own voters, because these demands are extremely popular itself. These demonstrations of the demand for a radical and a socialist policy should be the starting point of a campaign, not just in Parliament, but outside. And a good start would be, for instance, for a mass national health demonstration to stop the privatisation in the hospitals. That would be linked with resisting the cuts in education, no school cuts, to completely eliminate the kind of programme that's put forward by the government, by this present government, which has as its aim that children should clean their own schools, the abolition of school dinners condemned by people like Jamie Oliver, and so on. We say no retreats, no further cuts, reverse the cuts that have taken place, and no further cuts itself. We think the whole of the Labour movement should be committed to this programme. This is not just a victory for Corbyn and for Labour. This is a victory for all of us who stand on the left or are committed socialists. The right in the Labour Party who have tried to accommodate themselves to the victory of Jeremy Corbyn. They've spent the last 2 to 3 years denigrating him. Many Labour candidates in this election refused to mention Corbyn, have his photograph on their election literature. Now they're scrambling to get on board the Corbyn bandwagon. We say these are false friends to the Labour movement and to socialism. We say it's people like us, the Socialist Party and others, who've been excluded, who've been witch hunted, expelled from the Labour Party. Now is the time to open up the Labour Party to all of those who stand in support of the programme of Jeremy Corbyn and want to go a little bit further in order to consolidate his victory and to develop it in the direction of socialism. This is the only way to really capitalise on the programme of Jeremy Corbyn and open up an entirely new period for the Labour movement, for the Labour Party itself, for the working class in general. The result of this election is a product, a direct reflection of the crisis of capitalism, particularly of 2007-8, that has not been solved. If you look at the economic experts, on the horizon is a new crisis. A new crisis will devastate the lives of working people. The only way to prevent this is to consolidate the victory of Jeremy Corbyn, to consolidate it on class and socialist lines, to introduce a socialist plan as the centrepiece for the programme of Corbyn, and in that way go forward in the future to a new general election, which will be called undoubtedly, because Theresa May will not last, and that could bring to power a majority Jeremy Corbyn-led government that could begin the socialist transformation of Britain.